Sex. It's not that deep. Everything love, lust, and life.
Sex. We talk about it so you can get better at it. We can all get better at it and maybe feel a bit happier in the process. It's not that deep. Or is it?
Hi, welcome to another episode of Sex, It's Not That Deep. This is one of our Sex Shorts episodes where it's going to be a much shorter episode. With me today is my wife, Fran. My name is Andy. And we're following on from our most recent podcast where we covered off communication in an episode called Let's Talk About Sex, Please. And between recording that and recording this today, myself and Fran, we visited a sex club that we go to fairly regularly. And I suppose with a heightened awareness around the recent podcast we'd done, where it was all about talking about sex, it was about communicating clearer about it. I think we had a heightened awareness of that going into the evening. And I think for both of us, the feel and the mood was so good, and it felt so liberating to be able to talk to people, obviously with a backdrop of you're in a place where sex is a key part of that dynamic. But it was such a good night, and it was such a positive conversation, and we were leaving there thinking, we've got to talk about this on an episode because it was such a good night and a good feel to be talking about it. Wouldn't you agree, Fran?
Yeah, and I think it's such a different conversational experience to anything we've ever had before as well. I think it was so free and so flowed so well that it made me realise what we've been missing in normal conversation. And I'm not the sort of person, you'd be the first to say, I'm not the sort of person to kind of hold back and keep stuff from a conversation. What you see is what you get with me, really, isn't it?
Yeah, you've got no filter.
No. But actually, I didn't realise until we were at that conversation there that you do filter, and it does inhibit how you express who you are and be who you are, and that kind of ability to talk about any subject really allows you to be yourself at its fullest.
Yeah, definitely. I think for a bit of context for people that have maybe never been to a sex club before, so yes, a big aim of the night is that you're going to end up having sex one way or another, but there's a good social element to it as well. And, you know, the first third to a half of the night is just a social thing. It's just a bar as people chatting and meeting each other for the first time in many cases, or maybe have met before or chatted online. But from our, experience that night, it was the first time we'd met most of the people there, if not all. And you have the small talk, you have the general chit chat that you have, but obviously you've got that underlying, I suppose, comfort and confidence that you've got that fallback option of sex, because, for some people it might be the first time they've visited there, they've got questions, they want to learn about it and understand what's in store for them that night maybe. But I think for people who are used to it as well, it's good just to talk to people that you've not spoken to before about sex, isn't it?
But also, I mean, like you're saying about having questions about the night. When we first started going to those sorts of clubs, we weren't able to ask those questions of people that were there at the time. And so they just sit in the back of your mind. And just to have everything out there and to have it talked about meant that all those questions had gone away. And just imagine how liberating that would be if we could have those kind of conversations regularly and have those kind of questions that we've all got about sex answered by people that we know who've gone through something. How much better it would be if someone you know has done something and has an experience of something that you can then sort of relate to. And it gives you that nice insight into a question that you might have, that instead of just a Google answer, you've got an actual person that you respect or you know about telling you what their experience of it was. And I think that's just something that we really miss in our conversation. And I realised that how much we do filter our lives, because we went to a party the other day, and the conversation there just becomes sort of 3 or 4 topics you can talk about. You can talk about work, you can talk about your kids, you can talk about holidays, and they become very samey. And I once went on a speed dating thing, and there were just three topics of conversation, and someone sat down and said, right, let's not talk about work or this or that. And it completely flabbergasted me at the time, because I was so used to these are the things you talk about. But actually, if you start having those conversations that don't stick just to those topics, it becomes so much more interesting a conversation to have. And those kind of conversations that you have with your best friend where they go all over the houses and they feel like great conversations to have. But then if you could have that conversation with more people, and not only does it go all over the houses, but it can stray into topics like sex, that then the full range of who you are is out there. And I just think that that's so much more liberating.
Yeah, I know what you mean. There's always that censorship, isn't there? I've talked about it in the main podcast a few days ago that, you know, in my relationship, friends that I've had over the years, you know, that's the one area you never really talk about. And I don't know whether that's more of a male thing or not, but you never talk about sex. You never talk about your experiences all that well. But, you know, if you're into sports, you talk to your friends, you find people that you can talk to about sports. If you're into the gym, if you're into cooking, you always find people with that shared interest that you can talk to about. And I think sex is such an important thing for adulthood. It's the one thing you don't really talk about that often. And so it's great to find that place where you can just speak to people openly.
Well, with censorship, I mean, you have, when you're at work, you know, you have certain topics that you can talk about and ones you not really work topics. But you're not at work when you're with your friends. So why are you censored in those conversations as well? And why is this a topic that we can't talk about? Because you're with your friends, they should be able to talk about everything, really, shouldn't you? That's the whole point of deep friendships and meaningful friendships. And if that part of conversation is closed off, then you're not quite reaching that depth of friendship as well that you could be.
I think as well there's so many missed opportunities because, you know, if one of my friends said to me, would you mind if we ever talked about sex? It doesn't mean I want to have sex with you. It's just I want to talk about it because it's an important part of my life. I'd be thrilled to bits. I'd be like, yeah, brilliant. Let's do it. Let's talk about it because there's nothing to be ashamed of. And, you know, and it'd be interesting, fun, and between friends, it'd probably be amusing at times. It'd be a great thing to talk about, but you don't. But I think that's the missed opportunity. If somebody came to me and said that, I'd be well up for it. I'd be like, yeah, let's talk about it. It'd be great. You don't know how many other people feel like that.
I think having that into a conversation is probably the easiest thing. Having this podcast to talk about with people was the real into that conversation, wasn't it? And I've gone away to friends and talked about the podcast itself, and then we've moved on to sort of talk about sex in a wider area that I just wouldn't have gone and had those conversations without having that in. And I think actually talking about the podcast and here's some things that we're looking at has been really, really handy for that. And I think maybe finding some sort of topic to be like, what do you think about this topic? Have you seen this subject? Have you seen this piece of evidence for a particular viewpoint or something? It's a really good way to find an to talk with people. And I found that, I mean, someone I spoke to, I completely didn't think that they would talk to me about sex at all. And yet they had views and interesting views that were different to mine that I would never have known about otherwise.
And that's exactly that. Without having that bit of conversation and get it started, you'd never have had that. And it could be that, you know, they were dying to talk to people about it, but never have the opportunity.
I totally thought they wouldn't talk about it, but maybe that's why they thought that I wouldn't talk, or they didn't talk to me about it. Maybe it's because they thought, you know, maybe it's people think people are on a different level. You know, with some people have had lots of sex, some people have very little, and outsiders' views of that might be completely different to the truth as well. Then that causes people to maybe people who've had less to censor themselves because they think I don't have enough experience on this topic, or people who've had more to censor themselves because they think, well, I don't want to reveal that I'm, you know, overly. I don't want people to think that I'm overly into it or whatever. But actually, you know, you don't feel that about sport. You know, you don't ever think, I can't talk to this person about football because maybe I've not kicked a football as much as them. You know, that's totally never enters people's enters people's thoughts. And yet it does about sex.
So I made a conscious effort to speak to a friend of mine and sort of drop it in conversation. You know, I used the podcast, I used where we'd been the night before at the sex club that we'd gone to as just to drop it in and sort of see how they reacted. And if they absolutely didn't want to talk about it, we wouldn't go any further. But we ended up having a really good conversation that, you know, in 10 years or more of friendship, we've never strayed that way. And then we had a chat, and it wasn't detailed, it wasn't sordid, it was just sort of dipping a toe, having a chat about it, and it was really good. And I think it was appreciated both sides, really.
It was such a revelation to me to be able to talk to people that I know about it, and it made you feel so good to just kind of let it out there. It's almost, I think, I would liken it to like coming out. You know, like when people have got all this pent up angst about something, and then you often hear about people coming out and people being like, yeah, no, we knew that, it's fine, sort of thing. And the relief that they feel, I feel that kind of relief, I think, from just that aspect of me being out there and being accepted. I mean, having blue hair is an obvious thing, and so that's something that's always been accepted up front, but this is something that you don't see, and so you have to physically put it out there for people to accept you for it. But people do. And I think that's the thing. Everyone thinks that no one will accept me talking about this, but actually people do.
I think as much as the opportunity is for you to be able to talk about sex and talk about something you enjoy and learn about it from other people, I think as much as anything, there's an opportunity for people to be able to reciprocate and have that conversation back at you. And I just think there's so many people that would like to talk about it that don't. And I just think I suppose my closing bit to people today would be, think of a friend or someone you know that, you know, you might yourself think, I wish I could talk about this to other people. You've probably got friends that feel exactly the same. So, you know, I suppose that would be my thing to say to people today is think about friends that maybe you could drop that in conversation, see how it's received, and, you know, you might end up with somebody you can have good, wholesome, informative and fun conversations with.
Maybe use this podcast as an in, you know, have you heard this? Have you talked about it? And have you talked about it with other people? Is this something, you know, what do you think of that as a viewpoint, as a starting point in a conversation? Sort of takes it out then. It's not you specifically bringing it up, it's you bringing up other people talking about it, us talking about it.
Well, that's the whole point in the podcast, isn't it? We're just normal people who just want to talk about it and enjoy having that conversation and seeing where it goes. And, you know, maybe there's a lot of people that could learn from that.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, that's all we've got time for today. Thanks for listening, everyone. As ever, check us out on social media. Give us a review. Give us a thumbs up on all your usual podcast locations. That'd be massively appreciated. And we'll talk to you again soon.
Sex. It's not that deep.